Walt Cunningham, this is your first flight with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration in Project Apollo. Now, you're one of the 3 astronauts on Apollo 7, and I'm sure people all over the world would like to know a little bit about this fellow named Walter Cunningham. Where are you from originally? Where were you born?
Well, I was born in Creston, Iowa, but I claim my hometown now is Santa Monica, California.
That's near Los Angeles, isn't it?
That's right. It's on the ocean just due west of Los Angeles. And I've lived out there since I was almost 6 years old, and except for being gone in the service and being down here on this job, that's been my home all my life.
When did you come into the astronaut program?
I came into the astronaut program in 1963. As a matter of fact, if we launch on October 14th of this year, it'll be a 5-year anniversary of how long I've been here.
It will. Now,
Yeah.
What was your flying background before that, and your educational background?
I got my flying experience in the Naval Air Training Command. I initially went into the service after a year of college as a Navy enlisted man. And after a year and a half of that, I was accepted in Navy flight training. After a year and a half of flight training, I accepted my commission in the Marine Corps and served another 3 years on active duty with the Marine Corps. When I was released from active duty with the Marine Corps to go back to school, I flew with the Marine Corps Reserve, what we call a weekend warrior, for another 9 years before, after I came into this program, they made me drop out of the weekend warrior flying because of time commitments, and I've since been in what we call the volunteer reserve. So right now I've got almost 18 years military credit. Even though I'm a civilian on this job, I have been in reserves all this time.
You still have a military rank, don't you?
That's correct.
And it's in the Marines?
I'm presently a major in the Marine Corps Reserve.
And a NASA astronaut.
That's right.
And let's ask just a little more about what's your age?
Right now I'm 36 years old.
All right. And your family?
I have 1 wife and 2 children.
That's nice. And tell us about your Lois, your wife, right?
Right.
And your children?
Married my wife 12 years ago, and I have a little boy that's 8 years old, just had his 8th birthday. I was fortunate to be able to come home coincidentally for his birthday party, because you never can count on those things in this program. And a little girl that's 5 and a half, and they're both in school now, and they're a great joy to both of us. I just don't get a chance to see enough of them lately.
Are they going to be able to stay home and watch the television on launch day?
Well, I'm going to do a little better than that. I'm taking Lo down to the Cape for the launch, and I'm taking the 2 kids, too.
So they're going to be able to see that liftoff.
That's right.
Oh, boy, won't that be a joy of their lifetimes.
It'll be one of the joys of mine.
Walt, would you tell us what your job is on Apollo 7?
Well, as you may know, we have 3 crewmen on the Apollo spacecraft, and they're identified by title as the command pilot, command module pilot, and the lunar excursion module pilot, or LEM pilot. I'm sitting in the seat where I would normally be a LEM pilot. I'm called a LEM pilot, but we don't have a LEM on this flight.
A lunar module.
Lunar module.
We're not going to the moon this time.
That's right. So you might call me a LEM pilot without a LEM. On the other hand, since it's the first flight of a command module, we have a lot of things on our mind that subsequent flights that do have LEMs along will not have to be concerned about. That is the initial checkout of the spacecraft itself.
Which position is this lunar module pilot?
Lunar module pilot sitting in the right seat.
All the way over on the right.
Right.
Okay.
And I think we could best characterize the jobs of the 3 people by kind of the commanding officer of the flight, the navigator, more or less, and the systems engineer, if you want to characterize the tasks they actually do. Now, during the flight, we will be switching around and doing functions in all 3 seats. However, in order to accomplish the training, you have to be able to specialize. In fact, you cannot accomplish the training without specializing, and we're very limited in the amount of cross-training we can do.
In an Apollo 7, since there's no lunar module, you're going to be that systems engineer.
That's correct. And in essence, I'm responsible for all of the spacecraft systems, or the specialist knowledge of the spacecraft systems, of all of those except the guidance and navigation, and to a certain degree the stabilization and control system. Now, the guidance and navigation is a very big part by itself, and Don Isley will be taking care of that. The other systems that are still left to be accounted for are like the communication systems, the environmental control systems, the electric power system, the cryogenic system.
The cryogenic, the cold, super cold system.
That's right, the liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, which is used to power the fuel cells. They have the service propulsion system, the reaction control systems, the command module reaction control system, and 2 or 3 others that escape me right now. But it's a full-time task, that's right.
And would you tell us something of the things that you'll be doing during the first few hours? Say during the first day. What will you be doing on those things?
Well, during the first day, we have several periods. You might break that first day up into pretty logically. One is the first 6 revolutions, or 6 revs as we call it. Takes you up to about 9 hours into the flight. Up until that period of time, we're busy trying to check the spacecraft systems out, all of the spacecraft systems we have on board, to the degree which will allow us to say we can go up until the 17th rev. This is because there are no really excellent recovery areas and not much coverage between Rev 6 and Rev 17. After Rev 17, again, you pick back up these stateside passes and you have a lot of long-time coverage on it. So the first period is up until we get a go, no-go for 17-1. That's what we call it.
17-1. That means a prime recovery area in the 17th
Rev
revolution.
17. Right. When we get that go, at that time, Don Isley will be starting his sleep period.
Mm-hmm.
And Wally and I will be performing other systems tasks, but those that we considered less critical and not necessary to perform to get the go, no-go.
Mm-hmm.
After Don gets in an 8-hour sleep period nominally, then Don will be up for the really quiet revs. He'll be there by himself. And Wally and I will have an 8-hour sleep period. That accounts for the first day, essentially. The rendezvous on this flight is going to be one of the more interesting periods. I'm sure the public will be very much interested in it. However, it's not by itself a significant portion of the flight. I don't know just exactly what percentage of the mission requirements are filled by filling the rendezvous, but it's nevertheless an important little operational segment and also an extremely interesting one. Probably the most interesting aspect of the flight, except for the launch and the reentry. And that period commences roughly at about 24 hours, where we start making the service propulsion system burns. At that point, you're starting to set yourself up for the rendezvous itself. So from 24 hours on to about 31 hours, we consider really tied up with the rendezvous operations. During that time, the guidance and navigation system, which is what we were attempting to validate to accomplish an onboard rendezvous, will be run by Don. Now, Wally will be flying the spacecraft for the rendezvous, executing the burns. Don will be doing the guidance and navigation and running the computer programs which are used to calculate these burns and the rendezvous, and I'll be handling all of the backup procedures for the rendezvous.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in this case, this means having onboard charts where we take certain backup data at certain very critical times and we calculate a solution that's worked out on charts. This is in the event that the guidance and navigation system fails. We have 3 votes on the burns that we make for the rendezvous. We have the guidance and navigation system, we have a ground updated piece of information on the burn, and we have the backup solutions, which I'm accomplishing. Now we pick out the best solution of those 3 and burn it. If the guidance and navigation system fails,
the instruments,
the computer, onboard computer, then we have the ground solution, which is theoretically is an excellent one, and we have the chart
that's coming
solution
from everybody here at Mission
Control Center.
Yeah.
So throughout the rendezvous, I'm
responsible. The third one is what? The third one is your?
The third one is the onboard charts, where we calculate a backup solution off of these charts.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there is a period of time where you're out of touch with the ground after you make your transfer. You first initiate the transfer for the rendezvous. It occurs about, say, 40 minutes, 35, 40 minutes before the actual rendezvous is accomplished. From that time on, there's a period where we're out of touch with mission control, and in that case, we have the onboard guidance and navigation system, or we have the charts. And if the guidance and navigation system fails, the charts are what we have to depend on to make the rendezvous. Mm-hmm. So I'm responsible to keep the charts and come up with a backup solution.
This is one of the most interesting parts of the flight, isn't it? This rendezvous with the S4B stage?
Yes, it is. And I will suspect that, as you say, this is my first flight, and I can only kind of theorize about what goes on, but I kind of see that the first day you're pretty well tied up with the newness of it all. Also, you're very busy the first day. They always seem to want to front load these flight plans so you can get as much done the first day as possible. The second day, we've got this big event, the rendezvous, to look forward to, which is the most interesting part from our point of view of the next 7 or 8 days.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of look forward to the third day of being a little bit of a letdown up there and everybody waiting for that one SPS burn that we make a day or something like that.
That one SPS burn, that's the big rocket on the back end of the service module.
That's the 21,000-pound thrust engine we have back there for making onboard burns, large burns, and validating the service propulsion system itself.
The SPS, the Service Propulsion System.
Yes.
That's the thing that's eventually to be used to get that command module and LEM to the vicinity of the moon, and then
well,
back.
the S4B, which is the third stage of the booster, is the one that actually makes the burn that sends you out of Earth orbit to the moon. However, after that, it's all on the Service Propulsion System. It's a Service Propulsion System that has to retrofire you into a lunar orbit, and it's a Service Propulsion System that has to make an extremely long burn to get you out of lunar orbit and come home. Well, we will, all three of us tend to settle down into, as what you would call, really, it is routine tasks. Probably the high point of each day will be an SPS, Service Propulsion System burn. However, those are essentially routine too. There's one scheduled just about every day, and the procedure is very routine to us, but at least we have the thrill of changing our orbit, which is an interesting aspect of the flight. It's taken up by systems monitoring checks. There are a lot of what we call detailed test objectives to accomplish, and we have onboard procedures to accomplish these. This, for example, one requirement is to really verify what is the heat rejection and acceptance capability of the radiators. Is the means by which we dissipate the heat that's generated in the vehicle to outer space.
When you expend energy, you're going to generate heat.
That's right. We expend energy inside both as electronic heat, you know, the components that get heated up, and the metabolic heat that comes from the human bodies. Now that heat is taken out of the spacecraft by a coolant loop. It's like a radiator system in a car. That system runs in through the engine and takes the heat away from the cylinders, but then it runs over to the radiator, which is exactly what we do in the spacecraft, runs to a radiator. And in a car, the radiator is cooled by the air blowing through it. Okay, in space we don't have that air blowing through it, but we have a very, very cold environment. A requirement would be to go into a certain attitude and set certain power levels on the spacecraft and operate for so many hours and see what does the temperature of this glycol come to.
Glycol, that's the antifreeze solution.
That's the antifreeze that we run through the coolant loops.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now we have several dozen primary and secondary objectives to accomplish. They're all scheduled in during those 10 days.
As you approach the last day of the flight, you're going to be busy again. You will be performing again some of the many systems checks you've done throughout the flight. And I think at that point you'll be putting suits on again after having had them off for a while, won't you?
That's correct. The last day, it's called a 10.8-day flight if it goes that long, and whether it goes that long or not depends on how much you've accomplished when. For example, if you ended up at the end of 7 days and you'd accomplished 98% of the objectives of the flight, you weigh the next 2% you're going to accomplish by going another 4 days, for example. But nominally the flight would last 10.8 days, which means that we would deorbit into recovery area 164-1. That's in the Atlantic, starting the 164th rev. The preparation for that deorbit would start some probably 7 hours prior to deorbit. Everybody would be up at that time. We'd start putting the suits back on fairly shortly after that. Those suits, incidentally, would have been off ever since the first day. Now, the way the suiting and unsuiting goes on the mission is that on the first rev, when we get a go-no-go past 2-1, or I should say a go-no-go for recovery area 6-4, at that point...
That gets you through about a first day of flight, not quite.
9 hours. It gets you through the first 9 hours, but it's the high coverage areas, and it allows people to make a pretty good assessment of the spacecraft to go on for another whole day. At that point, we would break up the suits. By that I mean we'd take the gloves and the helmets off and stow them. When we approached 6-4 and we got a go for 17-1 or longer, we would then go ahead and unsuit. And we would stow those suits and be out of those suits until the last day. Now, some 7 hours prior to deorbit, we'd go ahead and start getting suited up. We would have started probably the day before to restow all the items that we possibly could, but there are a lot of items that are going to have to stay out until the very last. For example, the still camera. There are certain photographs you still might want to be getting, and if you still have film left, you'd want to take the targets of opportunity as they presented themselves. You would obviously re-verify the systems again. You hope to have a pretty good handle on everything by that time, and it's just it's a very routine matter. But you would certainly approach the last burn, while it's still a routine one, you would approach it with even more care than you had the earlier ones, because it differs in just one small aspect, in that it brings you back home. And I suspect...
A rather important aspect.
We consider it the most important aspect of the whole flight. And I suspect that our feelings will be running a little bit higher about getting that burn off than the earlier ones. We have more than one way to deorbit, of course, but it'd be nice to come back first class with a surface propulsion system burn and land next to the carrier if possible.